Let's turn now to Sima Guang. Wang Anshi, as I've mentioned, and his supporters were in power for 50 years, well after Wang Anshi himself died in 1086. But there was tremendous and growing opposition. Within a year of the policies being announced, various officials started to oppose them. Eventually, the leading opponent became Sima Guang, and Sima Guang would eventually then come into office and try to undo all of the policies. Let me tell you something about his background. Sima Guang was born in the northwest in Sha County in Shanxi Province. In 1019, he was 2 years older than Wang Anshi. A wealthy family, to be sure, but more importantly, a family that had served the Song dynasty almost since its founding. Although he did earn a Jinshi degree, the highest civil service examination degree, in fact, he had been given official rank when he was only 15 years old. He had been given that rank because his family was so highly placed that it had the privilege of protecting, so to speak, a son or a grandson and getting official rank for them, which made them eligible for appointment. So at 15 years old, he's already a ranked person. He didn't need, in fact, to ever take the examinations. He could have been appointed, but he was ambitious. And by taking the civil service examinations, he made himself eligible for the fast track in government and for high office later. He spent almost all his career at court, rarely went out to the provinces to serve. When he did, it was in the north. So a northerner, the capital is in the north, his local services in the north. When Wang Anshi's policies are announced, he starts to oppose them. And in 1071, he's forced out of government. And a few years later, he decides he would retire and settles in the city of Luoyang, which had become a haven for the conservative elite, for the opponents of the new policies. He spent his time in those years in Luoyang working on a monumental history of China from 403 BC to the founding of the Song dynasty in 960. And after the emperor died in 1085, the Empress Dowager, who had not been sympathetic to the new policies, the new laws, called Sima Guang to government, summoned him to court, and asked him to form a government. He did, and once he held power, he started to abolish every single one of the new laws. He died, however, a year after, but his policies continued. There are other stories we can tell you about this. In 1093, the Empress Dowager is no longer the regent. The new emperor decides to go back to the new policies, and so on. But you can read about that. Sima Guang from the start was suspicious of literary talents, suspicious of people like Ouyang Shou, people who idealized antiquity, who tried to force changes based on ideas about what was right rather than an understanding of what Sima Guang regarded as reality. And what was that understanding of reality? Well, for Sima Guang, it came from history, not the classics. It didn't come from high antiquity. It came from the historical record, the record of dynasties which had risen and fallen through time. And he says at one point that, for the last 1,400 years, we've only had 500 years of unity. Unity is unusual, it's hard, and what I've done is I've gone to study history and to write this monumental history book to figure out what rules government must follow to maintain unity and stability. What are the constant rules of political organization that can be inferred from the historical record? And he comes up with rules. He says, it's not a matter of cycles that, things rise and they fall. What is unified must split. It's not a matter of the mandate of heaven, that heaven decides to give somebody the right to unify the world in one empire. That's all, he says, nonsense. The mandate of heaven is nothing more than a sort of a camouflage for what's really happens with the founding of dynasty, which is military conquest or usurpation. But he says, there are rules you can follow that will ensure that your dynasty will last. And he actually argues that this model, if you follow his model, your dynasty could last for 1,000 years. Never had happened before, but it could once you understood the rules. And the rules involved making sure that all the different components were kept in their proper place. And he uses as a metaphor a house. A house is built on a foundation. What's the foundation? The common people. It's surrounded by a wall. What's the wall? The army. It has pillars upholding the roof. What are the pillars? They're the laws. They're the rules. The beams, the high officials, and so on. And who owns the house? The emperor. And if we want the house to stay in good shape forever, all we have to do is make sure that each component, each piece of the structure, fulfills its role, that it doesn't change, that it's not allowed to go off track, that it keeps working and doing its job as it should do it. That view is a very different view from Wang Anshi's view of the world as sort of an organic system, as a body, a living body, in which there's circulation and movement. This is a world of stability and solid structures. Well, I'm going to pause here so that you can go and read Sima Guang's objections, in his own words, to the new laws, and decide what you think he thinks is wrong with them.